Welcome. In all of this, let your tears fall. In all that's going on around us, we continue to reflect on what it means to live well, love authentically, and reflect God's truth, justice, and compassion. What do we need in order to do this? We need an utter knowing and reliance on the goodness and love of God. We need to hold on to and hold out joy, hope, encouragement, resilience, and so on. And we need to weep. Sometimes the only appropriate response to the suffering in the world around us is to mourn and grieve, to weep, lament, and perhaps even wail. Until we have named and experienced the sorrow we feel, we will be unable to tap into our deep inner resources of hope, joy, and resilience. This month we reflect on how we are called to mourn and how we can do this in healthy and helpful ways. As we continue reflecting on how to live God's way in all of this, let our tears fall. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord? How long? There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. Heart of my shattered heart, who will soothe the buried lament? Who will pour oil on the biting pang that never dies? The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. There is a time to mourn, to be real about what is happening around us, to stand with those struggling, and to acknowledge the very real suffering in the world around us, both up close as well as in situations far removed from our everyday lives. We may often feel inundated with the injustices, catastrophes, and loss of life we see and hear about. This can be overwhelming, and we can feel helpless in the face of it all. It may even be tempting to bury our heads in the sand, telling ourselves, well, I can't change anything anyway. We might remind ourselves to put our hope in God, to trust that God is in control, and to follow Paul's advice to rejoice in the Lord always. These are wise words, yet if we attempt to comfort ourselves or others with these words, before acknowledging and feeling the pain of those around us, we may be in danger of spiritual bypassing. We will probably also discover that any hope, trust, or joy we find is superficial and doesn't go deep enough to bring real healing or comfort to our souls. Spiritual bypassing is using spiritual practices to deny or minimize painful feelings in the hope that we would feel better. It's avoiding the reality of what is painful or difficult, and generally means we are repressing those emotions instead of acknowledging them and allowing them to be resolved. It distances us from painful situations, from our own feelings, and also from others. And yes, there are times we do need to protect ourselves from being overwhelmed by the suffering around us. However, denying the pain or the sorrow or the anger isn't a healthy long-term solution. In fact, denial, avoidance, and repression of painful feelings is never healthy. When we truly feel the depth of our emotions, we can experience healing. We might be well practiced in ignoring or avoiding painful emotions. However, the record of the Bible is a whole other story. People in biblical times knew how to mourn loudly, at length, with full body and soul, and often in community with others. They mourned the consequences of turning away from God, the lack of righteousness, care, and compassion. And they grieved deeply when people they loved died. The biblical theme of lament, both corporate and individual, is woven throughout the written history of God's engagement with humanity. The Psalms are literally testament to the mourning and lament of prophets, poets, and kings. Psalms also used in corporate worship when lament was the only appropriate response to the situation. God himself grieved in his heart at the wickedness of humanity in Noah's time. The NLT says, it broke God's heart. Jesus wept. Even though he knew the death of Lazarus was not the end of the story, he was so moved by the grief of Mary and Martha that he wept with those weeping. And I love the reminder that God keeps track of every tear I weep. This affirms my grief. This lets me know that mourning is very much an acceptable, even honourable part of being human. It is also a necessary part of our humanity. When we weep for the suffering of the world or our own sorrows, God is right there, collecting every tear and weeping with us. Acknowledging our grief and sometimes our horror at what we see happening, we open ourselves to healing, allowing God to bring healing as he gathers our tears. Then, in the honest, heartfelt expression of our emotions, all of them, whatever they are, we are freed to tap into those inner God-given resources of hope, faith, courage, resilience, and so on. Those resources that enable us to live well in the midst of a troubled and troubling world. When we have authentically grieved, then we can authentically comfort and encourage ourselves and others, and find all that we need to live well in all of this. A helpful way to grieve well is to create our own psalm of lament, based on the laments we see in the Psalms. A lament is a passionate expression of grief, and in the Bible, often in the form of music, poetry, or song, as we see in the Psalms. Psalms of lament, whether corporate or individual, are frequently based on the same pattern. They are addressed to God, followed by a complaint or expression of grief, then a confession of trust, a request for God's intervention, and finally, generally ending on a note of praise and thanksgiving. Psalm 5 is an example of this, as is the prayer below, Psalm 22. You might like to pray this prayer as your lament for whatever grief or sorrow you might be feeling, or you can use it to create your own psalm of lament. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." May you be deeply comforted when you deeply mourn. May you know that each tear you shed is known, seen, and gathered by the God of love. May you know that when you weep for others, you do not weep alone. The God of compassion weeps with you. And may you discern when it is time for weeping, time for healing, and time for laughing. May the God who gathers your tears be your comfort always.